Draft Higher Education Fee Limits and Fee Limit Conditions, England Amendment Regulations 2025.
I call the Minister to move.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship this evening, Ms Furness. This statutory instrument, SI, which was laid in draft on the 20th of January 2025, increases the limits on tuition fees that higher education providers can charge students studying undergraduate courses at approved fee cap providers in the 2025-2026 academic year. This SI also introduces new lower tuition fee limits for foundation years in classroom-based subjects offered by approved fee cap providers starting in the 2025-26 academic year. Chair, our higher education sector is part of what makes our country great. The sector makes a vital contribution to powering our economy, delivering world-leading research and innovation, enriching our society, supporting communities and opening up opportunities for individuals. From my own personal experience, the first in my family to go to university, I know that it is a beacon of opportunity and a sector that everyone in this house ought to be proud of. But now that world-leading sector is facing severe financial challenges, with tuition fees frozen for the last 7 years. Universities have suffered a significant real terms decline in their income. Teaching income per UK student that higher education institutions receive has declined in real terms since 2015, 2016, and is now approaching its lowest level since 1997. The Office for Students reports a growing number of higher education providers facing significant financial difficulty. Their analysis suggests that by 2025-26, up to 72% of providers could be in deficit and 40% facing low liquidity if no mitigating action is taken. Now, we need to act now to put our higher education sector on a secure footing in order to face the challenges of the next decade and to ensure that all students have confidence that they will receive the world-class higher education that they deserve. We also need to ensure that students are receiving value from their investment. Chair, taking each of those objectives in turn, this SI is intended to fix the foundations and put this vital sector on a more secure footing. It will mean that from the 1st of August 2025, tuition fee limits for undergraduate courses will increase by 3.1% in line with forecast inflation based on the RPIX inflation measure. This means an increase to £9,535 for a standard full-time course, £11,440 for a full-time accelerated course, and £7,145 for a part-time course. Increasing maximum fees has not been an easy decision, but it is a necessary one to ensure that our higher education sector can continue to contribute to our economic growth, globally important research, and our local communities, and continue to open up opportunities for those who wish to participate in higher education. Now, members across this committee will agree that it's no use keeping tuition fees down for students if the university is not there for them to attend, or if students are not receiving the quality education that they deserve and that is needed to meet the skills needs of our economy now and in the future. Now, I understand that some students may worry about the affordability of higher education, but I want to reassure students that eligible students will continue to be able to apply for an upfront fee loans to meet the full cost of their tuition, and that when they start repaying their loan, they will not see higher monthly repayments as a result of these changes to fees. And that is because monthly repayments depend on earnings, and at the time of their loan term, any outstanding loan balance will be written off. We'll also be working with the sector to ensure that it does more to improve access for those from disadvantaged backgrounds and to deliver the very best outcomes both for students and for the country. Now, this SI also focuses on improving efficiency and delivering value for students. Lower fee limits will be introduced for undergraduates starting foundation years in classroom-based subjects in 2025-26 academic year, £5,760 for a full-time course and £4,315 for a part-time course. Now, the government recognises the importance of foundation years for promoting access to higher education, but there has been a rapid and disproportionate growth of foundation years in classroom-based subjects that can be delivered more efficiently at a lower cost to students. Chair, to be clear, providers offering foundation years in all other subjects such as STEM and the creative arts will be able to charge fees up to the new fee limits of £9,535 for a standard full-time undergraduate course and £7,145 for part-time course. To conclude, this SI will put our higher education sector on a more secure footing, enabling the sector to continue to deliver world-class higher education that current students and those in future generations deserve. I hope that honourable members will support the important regulations which I commend to this committee.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft higher education fee limits and fee limits condition England Amendment Regulations 2025. Shadow Minister.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Minister. Through these regulations, the government is increasing tuition fees to £9,535 a year. And the maximum maintenance loan for people not living at home is £10,227 or £13,348 in London. So, after a typical 3-year degree, you will need to pay back up to £59,000 or up to £68,600 in London. And if the government continues to raise fees in the same way that it is doing here over this Parliament, then those figures will increase respectively to about £66,400 in the rest of the country, or up to £76,900 in London, both two very large numbers. Now, as it happens, this year's fees hike has not made universities any better off because the cost of the national insurance hike wipes out the benefits to the sector of the decision to increase tuition fees. Effectively, one broken promise on fees is paying for another broken promise on tax. And the Secretary of State's website still has on it the ironic headline, "Graduates, you will pay less under a Labour government." But in reality, they are paying higher fees and more tax too. Now, the current system produces some incredibly high marginal rates for young people. If you also have a postgraduate loan, or if you get into the high income child benefit charge range, then you can face incredibly high marginal rates, sometimes on middling incomes. And very sadly, the new government have abandoned plans to reform the HICPIC, so this problem is now not going to go away anytime soon. Graduates are having 51% of their income taxed away at just £50,000 of earnings, a sum which won't feel like being rich if you're renting in an expensive city. And over £60,000 of earnings, graduates with kids, particularly postgraduates, are facing marginal tax rates in the 58 to 73% range, the kind of rates that used to apply only to super taxes on the very wealthy. And one way that things have changed since the launch of fees is that we have much better data, particularly thanks to the creation of the LEO dataset under the last government. This lets us look at the value added of a degree compared to something else, and something else can sometimes be better. The latest government data shows that the median first degree graduate earnings 5 years after graduation were £29,900 compared to £33,800 for level 4 apprentices. So the apprentices are earning substantially more. Now, the Institute for Fiscal Studies have taken the deepest look at this question, looking at how graduate earnings are evolving for different types of institutions, different types of courses, and trying to compare that to a counterfactual of people with similar prior characteristics. And they looked at how many people saw their earnings boosted by a degree, what the costs were, and they worked out what the net benefit was for the individual, the taxpayer, and combined these perspectives to give a kind of final score. But their conclusion in the 2020 report was that, and I quote, "Seen across the whole lifetime, we estimate that total returns will be negative for around 30% of both men and women, a huge share for whom it's proving not to be worth it." And the Institute for Fiscal Studies also noted that while getting an undergraduate degree is worthwhile financially for most students, there is significant variation across subjects. Some subjects, such as medicine, law and economics, offer a springboard to very lucrative careers. However, a significant minority of mostly men are likely not to see positive returns as a result of going to university. Lifetime earnings remain low or negative for subjects such as creative arts and English. And in today's papers in the Times, there is a report based on my freedom of information requests to the Student Loans Company. And that in itself is telling. The whole process of assessing public spending on higher education needs to become radically more transparent. We should not need to rely on freedom of information requests just to get this data. But now that we do have it, it reveals the vast variations in the shares of loans that are being repaid between different higher education institutions. And where we see that only very small fractions of the money that's being loaned out by the taxpayer is getting paid back, then that often means that courses aren't that great for the taxpayer or the student either. who may end up feeling that their degree has cost them a lot, but not necessarily take them to where they hoped. Yet the government seems to have looked first to jack up fees on young people and seems to have given up on reforming the system to weed out courses that are lower value for money. Now, speaking of value for money, one university that will benefit from these regulations will be the University of Greater Manchester, and the Minister will have seen the extremely concerning reports in the press, particularly the Manchester Mill, about the attempts to pay huge sums of what is effectively taxpayers' money to relatives of the managers and indeed to what appears to be a shell company in Casablanca. Can the Minister assure me that he is investigating these concerning allegations? Now, I am very sympathetic to the plight of staff at universities where the leadership have got them into financial difficulties, be it through taking out ill-judged expensive loans or spending on buildings or becoming over-dependent on one particular group of overseas students. And I'm sympathetic to universities and lecturers more generally. It's a hugely important job. Universities are, I'm not just saying that they're all awash with cash, but it is worth saying that upfront real terms funding per student is still substantially above the level of the pre-fees era, even as student numbers have absolutely exploded. And there are many wonderful, valuable courses in our universities which I hope will expand and prosper. But young people in Britain are facing really large repayments now and high marginal rates which make it difficult to get on in life. So we absolutely do need to do right by universities, but also by young people. I believe through the reforms there is scope to get them a much better deal. So we should look to reforms first, rather than simply increase the burdens on young people. And that is why we are sceptical about these regulations.
Rachel Muskell.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair today. And I want to speak as an MP who has got 2 universities in my constituency, and I talk with them often, as I have over the last few years, about the new financial strains which they've been experiencing, and therefore have followed this debate extremely closely. Many universities have had a very difficult few years, and I think we need to acknowledge that and also congratulate them in the way that they have put measures in place in order to control those costs. But for many it's been at a cost to their courses, with many people, staff, including academics, being made redundant, and of course that means narrowing the offer, and at a time when of course we want to be able to excel in our higher education sector, one that we can be immensely proud of. And I fully understand why government have gone down the path of raising the tuition fees by 3.1% to a cap of £9,535, and of course with other adjustments aside. But to see this as a long-term solution would not be the right approach, and therefore I will be seeking assurances from the Minister that we won't be seeing further increases in this Parliament, but instead looking at how we do address the financial shocks which have been exposed to the sector. And they indeed have come in quick succession, as we know from our own experience. I know in York that the changes in the student visa has had a profound impact on the universities, decreasing the number of overseas students that's coming to the UK, and therefore universities are having to reschedule their costs in order to accommodate that. And I very much hope that the Minister will be making moves to enable students to come to the UK with their dependents in order to study, but also to put into our local economy, which so depends on those students making a wider, and their families making a wider positive contribution to our local economy, but helping the university with its own finances, and also to ensure that we can continue to have the excellence which comes with the academic study and research base that I see in the universities in York. Also, I know that universities themselves are trying to plan for the long term, and whilst I disagree with the Shadow Minister in saying about universities overreaching, I certainly know the University of York in placing itself in the centre of our city, as well as York St John, ensuring that it's part of the future economy, and therefore investing in the technologies and the jobs of the future is very much about an inclusion agenda in York, and we need to be able to facilitate that as a key anchor institution in places like York, which can help address the inequality we experience, but also the huge regional divides, as well as within our city, the inequality we face there. But we know also they've had wider pressures. The national insurance obligations have had a real impact on the sector, as well as the rise in the national minimum wage. Now, while I would urge the government to feed back to the Treasury in particular that those rises in national insurance could have been more nuanced to assist the sector through this, particularly if they had planned to raise student fees, whilst at the same time I do welcome the rise in the national living wage, but of course that has had an impact, a cumulative impact on the university's income and expenditure. And of course we all know since Brexit there's been a real impact on universities, the loss of the Erasmus scheme not equalled by the Turing scheme, the impacts on research relationships and academic work, the ability of students to come to the UK, the visa controls, and of course it is not long since we had the COVID shock and then the cost of living shock. And I think it's all had a cumulative impact on the budgets of universities who are trying to very much be a leader in our communities and also to drive forward the economy of the future. And despite its excellence, demanding more from its finances, restricting the ability of universities to then offset those costs has meant that the only place where the Minister can clearly find the costs to fall is on students, and I have real concern of that, not least in discussing this issue with students in York. So I understand the need for more income to come into universities, but at the same time the impact on students is considerable. I meet with my students' unions, and I know that the cost of housing in York is absolutely astronomical, having a real impact on students. So are the travel costs outside of London, significantly more. And as a result of that, students themselves are having to work ever more hours in the local economy to be able to offset these costs. They're being priced out of degrees, and many people who have started their studies in York have not been able to complete them because they're having to work more or less full time, but also it means that academic work is also suffering as a result. So by placing a greater financial burden on students, I have real concern that particularly those from lower socioeconomic families, and I certainly note the point in the Equality Impacts Assessment on page 27, saying that this may be a deterrent for students from lower socioeconomic status wanting to come to a university, but also the real cost that that's going to have. So I trust that the Minister in equal measure will be looking through the Office of Students about how we can support hardship resourcing for students to make sure that no student is turned away. But we know all in all, the tuition fee model is a very broken model of funding education, the money going and the risk being in the wrong places. And therefore I really do urge government, now that we are in power, to take a bigger view of funding for higher education. Education should be seen as the most significant investment in our economy. It fuels our research and innovation, it drives economic benefit, and it transforms people's lives, and we need to make sure there are no exclusions from that. I therefore regret that the failures of the last administration have brought us to this point of raising fees today, and I trust that we can find better solutions in tackling the wider funding of higher education and its broader ecosystem, not least as universities are driving research and innovation to drive our whole economy forward. So in closing, can I just ask the Minister to say if he expects other rises to come in student fees over the course of this Parliament, what steps the government are taking to ensure that people from lower socioeconomic status are not impacted by this policy, and I do note that there will be a rise in the amount of money students will be able to access, and what he has said about the amount students pay back, and also what future planning that he and his colleagues are doing to ensure that there is a better account and a better process of being able to fund higher education in the future.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank the Shadow Minister and other members of the committee for their contributions to this debate. Firstly, I'd like to reiterate the importance of this SI for putting our higher education sector on a secure footing and for ensuring that students are receiving value from their investment. Members of this committee will know how important this sector is for economic growth, its world-leading research and the contribution it makes to local communities, as well as changing the lives of people who participate within it. Providers have suffered a significant real terms decline in their income following 7 years of frozen tuition fees, and we need to act now to ensure that future generations of students can benefit from the experience of participating in this world-class higher education sector. But we are clear that in universities, as across our public services, investment can only come with the promise of major reform. And that is why my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, announced in the House of Commons on the 4th of November last year that we will publish a plan for higher education reform in the summer. Turning to the points that members of the committee have raised this evening, the Shadow Minister made a number of points tonight on the national insurance contributions, and as the Chancellor set out in budget, raising the revenue required to fund public services and restore economic stability requires difficult decisions on tax, which is why this government is asking employers to contribute more. And we strongly believe that this is the fairest choice to help fund the NHS and wider national priorities. The higher education finance and funding system needs to work for students, taxpayers and providers, and the fee increase represents a significant additional investment from students into the sector, and we will support higher education providers in managing the financial challenges that they are facing. On the contributions with regards to the student loan repayments, we understand that some students may worry about the impact that the increased fee limits will have on the size of their loan. And we want to reassure students that when they start repaying their loan, they will not see higher monthly repayments as a result of these changes to fee and maintenance loans. And that is because student loans are not like consumer loans. Monthly repayments depend on earnings, not simply the amount borrowed or interest rates. And at the end of any loan term, any remaining loan balance, including interest built up, will be cancelled. The Shadow Minister asked with regards to graduate earnings, and graduates on average benefit from their university education by over £100,000 in their lifetime compared to someone who did not go to higher education. The Shadow Minister also asked with regards to the press coverage around Greater Manchester University. This, of course, is a matter for the University of Greater Manchester, but we understand the Office for Students, the independent regulator for HE in England, has also been notified of this case, and the university is conducting its own investigation, and it would not be appropriate at this stage to comment any further. My honourable friend for York Central, who I know is a real champion for higher education, both in terms of her constituents and for her community, made a number of very helpful points on quality. Students and the taxpayer have a right to expect a good quality education in return for their considerable investment in higher education. And for this investment, students deserve excellent teaching that supports them to learn and to develop the skills that they need to achieve their full potential in future. This is why we have made a commitment to raise teaching standards in our universities in our manifesto. And we want higher education providers to collaborate, share best practice and deliver continuous improvement in the quality of their provision. Students also deserve to know what to expect when making their investment in higher education. We want providers to be transparent about the things that matter to students, like the number of contract hours that they can expect when studying specific courses. On higher education international students, the Secretary of State for Education in her speech in July 2024 made it clear that we welcome international students who have a positive impact on UK higher education and on our economy and society as a whole. And international students enrich our university campuses. They forge lifelong friendships, and our domestic students and become a global ambassador for the UK. Our universities have taught dozens of current and recent world leaders, and this is an enormous amount of soft power as well as the very strong relationships that have built up. And that is why I just finished this particular point. That is why we offer international students who complete their studies successfully the opportunity to work or look for work in the UK on a graduate visa for 2 or 3 years after their studies finish, allowing them to live, work and contribute to our society and economy. I will give way.
I'm grateful for what the Minister is saying. However, we do know that the changes in visa requirements has had a major impact on higher education, and therefore I just urge him to take that back to the Department and to look at that again so that our universities can welcome students and their dependents into our country.
My honourable friend is being very kind to me. She will know that I'm not the spokesperson in government on higher education, but I will certainly make sure that my colleague that does lead on higher education has heard that point and will take that back to the department. So in closing, Chair, my honourable friend made a number of helpful points with regards to access and participation. Our mission, of course, is to break down that link between background and success, which has hampered the life chances of too many in this country. We're committed to supporting the aspiration of every person who meets the requirements and wants to go to university. We know that there are stubborn and persistent inequalities within our education system, and these must be addressed. It is vital that all higher education providers play a stronger role in expanding access and improving outcomes for disadvantaged students. By summer, we will set out our plan for higher education reform and the parts we expect providers to play here. Through these reforms, we are determined to ensure universities are engines of opportunity, fairness and growth. Chair, I commend these regulations to the House.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft higher education fee limits and fee limit condition England Amendment Regulations 2025. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I believe the ayes have it. Thank you very much.